So hello everybody. So this is Jingbo Louise Liu. So today we are very delighted to invite Dr. Ripudaman Malhotra, who is going to give us the monthly invited talk, the number 7 talk. So our invited speaker is a retired organic chemist. So he has been working in the SRI International for quite a long time with the specialization on the energy-related issues. He published more than 100 peer-reviewed articles and several technical monographs. In 2010, so he co-authored a book entitled A Cubic Mile of Oil, the Looming Energy Crisis and Options for Averting It. So this book is highly, very well reviewed, and is called The Citizen Guide to the Energy and to Call for an Informed Public Debate. In 2005, Dr. Malhotra received the name of a SRI Fellow. This SRI Fellow is the highest award at the SRI for the employee due to their excellence in research contribution. In 2015, so he received the Storch Award from American Chemical Society. At that time, I understand this Storch Award is our Energy and Fuels Division Award. So right now it's the national award. In 2018, he was named the Fellow of American Chemical Society. So today, he's going to give us the talk, The Challenge of Meeting Global Energy Needs while Averting the Catastrophic Effects of Climate Change. So I will move the time to Dr. Malhotra. So the time is yours.
Okay. So the title of my talk in an abbreviated form is Getting to Zero. That's zero emissions, preparing for deep decarbonization. I'm going to start by asking a quick question for the people who are here. We often hear that renewables, the prices are falling very rapidly, as are batteries. And so with renewables like wind and solar and battery and our other storage mechanisms, we can meet all our energy needs while protecting us from climate change calamity. That is, there is no room for nuclear power in the future. Do you agree, disagree with this statement? That's the poll. We're going to take a few seconds. So there are 4 choices, just click one of them.
We give everybody 45 seconds.
There are some people who have agreed. Second question is somehow answering the second question.
Can I interrupt a little? Just answer the first question, because I see 50% disagree. Okay. 19% somewhat agree, 18, oh, it's a little changing.
Okay, good.
And then 11% agree.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's end the poll. Let's start with the talk. So the talk, the premise of this talk is that climate change is real and it is happening. it's not something that I'm going to talk much about today. That's another subject. And most of my talk is based on the fact that energy consumption is the main driver of climate change. But energy use is also essential for our sustenance. And at the moment, about 80% of it is derived from fossil fuels. And it's the consumption of the fossil fuels that then is driving the climate change. And that urgent action is needed now. I think that urgency was kind of best expressed by Carter Bays a couple of years ago, when he said that some people complain that this is the hottest summer in the last 125 years. But I think of it as the coolest summer of the next 125 years, glass half full. That quote somewhat, in jest and somewhat catches that urgency that, hey, these things can be really bad. The good news on the other side is that there is just about time that we could turn it around. If we stop carbon emissions as quickly as we can, perhaps in the next 30 years, by 2050, if we can really get to zero, there's a hope. But we also need to then be working on reducing the carbon that is already in the air. And that needs to be done also. But if we want to avert the worst catastrophes, we need to get there and get there fast. So how do we do that? What's the path forward? Well, one path that everybody or many people agree to is we should electrify everything. Electrify transportation, electrify industry, electrify the built environment. Yeah, we don't, so you get your light, your heat, your locomotion, whatever, all these services, all the energy services that we use come from electricity. If we do that, and at the same time, convert production of energy, of electricity to carbon-free sources, we could do it. But that's a tall order. That's really a very, very tall order. And my answer is that if we do this and we try to expand all our energy sources to being electrical, we will need nuclear power, and nuclear power in a big way. See, if I look at the global CO2 emissions by different sectors, transportation accounts for about a quarter, roughly. Industry takes about a third. And so there is natural gas and coal being used quite a bit. This goes into also for building materials like steel and concrete. There's a fair amount of carbon emissions associated with those. Then the heating, lighting of buildings and offices and homes, running TVs and security systems, and a lot of agriculture. That's in the industry also. I think some of it is there in part of industry, fertilizers. So all these sectors. So when we are looking at mostly what I hear most of the politicians talk about is that, well, we'll just reduce the electricity that we are producing today, switch that to carbon-free sources. And then they have to, first of all, also increase the transportation. And the only transportation that people are really talking about these days is electric cars. And that it's a substantial chunk. It's not, but it's a good first step, but it is nowhere near what is needed. And if we want to then increase reduce the burning of carbon in the other sectors and do those operations using electricity, we need a lot more innovations. We need to develop some of these basic processes for using hydrogen to make the steels and other metals, or concrete with carbon capture that has to be there. But all these things really require a lot of energy. So the energy challenge that's ahead of us, it's a really tough problem. And we also have to reframe the debate about energy supply. That's because for the sake of sustaining the planet, we have to cut down the carbon emissions. but we derive our sustenance from energy consumption. It's essential for our living, for feeding the people throughout the world, for not just feeding them, but if we want to also allow them to develop and lead healthy, productive lives, we need a lot of energy. We are currently, we have about 3.5 billion people in the world who are not served well enough with electricity. 1 billion have hardly any, and another 2.5 billion barely enough. So providing them with opportunities to develop, and such a huge loss of human potential uh, that the world is suffering right now from. That has to be avoided. So we recognize that our current practice of energy production and consumption are unsustainable, but that energy use is central to the way of our lives, and the consequences of not meeting the future energy demands are dire. This tension between protecting the environment and social justice, and so a comprehensive energy policy must begin by acknowledging the magnitude of the problem, which brings with the problem as to how much energy is the world using. And I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the cubic mile of oil, which is the title of my book, which is a unit of energy use. It's the energy embodied in 1 cubic mile of oil. And what I'm showing on this chart is data from the BP Statistical Review of World Energy over the last 25 years or so. In CMO units. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4 CMO. The current level of global energy consumption, or primary energy consumption, is 4 cubic miles of oil, out of which the top, this thing is all from coal. Then this sliver is the renewable. This is wind and solar mostly, and a little bit of geothermal. You have hydroelectric, nuclear, then there is natural gas and oil. As you can see, changes have happened, but changes in energy they take time, and it's very small changes. The largest percentage-wise change that you are seeing is in this orange band corresponding to the renewables. Percentage-wise, they have increased more than 10 times, almost 50 times since the 2000. So percent increases are great in that, but the absolute amounts are trivial. And if we really want to increase it to replace not only the one that is from coal, which is going into the electricity and natural gas, but also transportation, which is in the oil, and other things, we have a very tall order. And here's a chart that shows what's the consequence of not providing adequate energy. Energy is at the basis for so many things, for producing food, for getting clean water, for sanitation, for providing the infrastructure for people to grow things and work. It's needed in all kinds of scenarios, for just about everything. And here's what I'm showing is a scatter plot of all the countries and against their human development index, which is a composite of the infant mortality. So high infant mortalities are in these, over here, this would correspond to high infant mortalities. Between 1980 and 2004, China reduced infant mortality rates from more than 2,000 per year to less than, per day, 2,000 a day infant mortality, that is children under the age of 5, more than 2,000 a day to less than 700, some 600 something, which is quite a remarkable thing. But that reduction happened on the back of coal. It was by increasing coal use 4-fold over that period. and also led to other developments. So development is tied to energy consumption. And the consumption over here, I've used the unit of a gallon of oil per person. This is per capita energy consumption. US is here on the right-hand side, just off the chart. Canada is further out. But you can see that as energy consumption increases, you rise up on this Human Development Index and kind of saturate it at a point. For a comfortable, what we would like to have everybody achieve is something on the order of 1,000 gallons of oil per year of primary energy consumption. That would assure it would be possible to, or allow one to achieve a Human Development Index of about 0.9. The energy consumption would still be less than half of what US is. It will be comparable to what's happening in Japan or some European countries. So let's now take a few minutes to estimate how much energy will we need by the middle of this century, giving ourselves about 30 years to get there. So, well, what's the world population going to be then? We'll say, let's assume it's about 9 billion people by then. It's already more than 7.5 billion. And the desired minimum per capita energy consumption to ensure, as I said, it was 1,000 gallons of oil per year. That would mean a total of about 9 trillion gallons, or about 8 CMO. That's doubling the total primary energy from today. And if I use an all-electric scenario, I will use that 1 gallon of oil is equal to about 12 kilowatt hours. That's all you get. You don't get 40 kilowatt hours. If I look at the heating, the BTU equivalents of, or kilowatt hours, people often talk about a gallon of oil as being 40 kilowatt hours, but you don't need 40 kilowatt hours. You generally burn, when you burn oil to produce electricity, you get only about a third of it. So if a electric production system is giving me electricity directly, kilowatt hours, that means fewer kilowatt hours will be required to displace a gallon of oil. So I don't need to produce 40 kilowatts. So there's a tremendous amount of savings that can happen in terms of just this increased efficiency by going directly to kilowatt hours electricity. All right. So what does that mean for the world? For the world, that would mean an annual consumption of about 108,000 terawatt hours. That's about 4.5 times the current global electricity production. So if you want to install what kind of terawatt capacity, because there are 8,000 some hours in a year, so that amount comes out to 12.3 terawatt installed capacity, assuming 100% time the system is producing energy, electricity. If it is producing at less than 100% capacity, well, correspondingly, you raise the terawatts of installed installations that you will require. And how much is it going to cost? Well, we can make a very quick estimate. Let's say it's about $5 a watt, which is a fairly high number, but reasonable. That would be, and I divided it over 30 years for doing that, comes to about $2 trillion a year, or about 2.7% of the gross world product. So when you put it in that perspective, even at $5 per watt, it's doable. It can be done in 30 years, 2.7% of gross world product, but it has to be consistent. That's the commitment. That's the level of commitment that is required. I don't think it is outrageous. I think it is doable, and we need to just get doing, but then we have to figure out how do we do that. And so the challenge is for the all renewable scenario. There are many people who are talking about that all we need is the renewables, wind and solar in particular, and they'll do it. And in fact, many of the leaders that we have, political leaders, are also championing those scenarios. Here's the challenge when you look at that. Wind and solar are intermittent sources. They have a capacity factor of often less than 30%, which means right away you have to increase your installed capacity more than 3 times. So instead of being 12 terawatts, you have to install now 30 to 40 terawatts. We actually, Germany did an experiment for us. Germany tried to install in a big way through their Energiewende program, spent €500 billion in installing wind and solar plants. But if you look at what happened to their emissions, hasn't really dropped after an initial thing, which happened largely because of the very inefficient older plants that used to be in East Germany. When they were phased out, the efficiency increased and the carbon emissions decreased. But after that, once this program was really installed and a lot of renewables were put in, the emissions have not really kept up, have not declined as much, because every time a megawatt or so of wind or solar is put in, you need backup power, you need storage. And another challenge that we have for all a renewable scenario, that these, because they're so dilute, you end up requiring a lot of material, tons of steel or concrete per unit of energy. And if you do the multiplication, just do the very simple, I say, well, I need so many tons of steel per megawatt of installed capacity. How much steel do I need? You can calculate things like that. You'll see that for many basic raw materials such as copper, steel, cement, the global supply chains will be severely constrained. We'll go through some of those in a second. And then the other part, which I alluded to earlier, is intermittency requires storage, and it would require storage on terawatt-hour scale. Right now, what is often happening is they use what are called spinning reserves of gas-fired turbines. Now, natural gas can be used for producing electricity. There are 2 types of natural gas plants. One are these gas-fired. They can be ramped up very quickly, but they have rather poor efficiency, only around 30% heat rates or something. But then there is the combined cycle natural gas, CCNG. They operate with about 50% thermal efficiency, but they are sluggish. They cannot be ramped up or down very quickly because there's a steam turbine after the gas turbine, because with the gas turbine portion, you can ramp up, you can turn the gas on or not, just like your automobile car, they can charge up very quickly. And it so happens that for every megawatt of wind or solar, there's generally a corresponding megawatt worth of natural gas fire plant also being installed to provide the backup. That backup, those emissions are not being counted as the emissions to the wind and solar things. So that's why they come out looking very clean. Actually, the greenhouse gas emissions from a combined cycle natural gas plant is less than a combination of a photovoltaic array together with a natural gas spinning reserve. And then, as I said, we'll have to reduce not only just the electric supply, but also work on transforming all the other industrial sectors, steel production, concrete production, whole bunch of other materials production, processes, refining, would have to be changed in a way to produce the materials that we require away. So there's a lot of innovation that will be needed. Water supply will be another big one. Here's a chart taken from the Department of Energy's Quadrennial Technology Review, showing us the materials requirement for various per unit energy. So per terawatt hour, mass of materials, tons per terawatt hour. So I have the solar, I have the hydro, wind, geothermal, and then the nuclear. Nuclear is the one of the, because it is so energy dense, intensity is so high, means its materials requirements are very, very little. So it takes about, for the same amount, to produce by wind energy, it's almost 10 times and about 14 times nuclear for the materials for by solar PV. Excuse me. So let's do just a quick exercise over here. Let's consider a 30 terawatt scenario. Remember, I told you that if we do an all electric scenario, it could be somewhere between 30 and 40 terawatt of installed capacity. So let's use the lower bound of it, 30 terawatt, and I'm following the protocol that was proposed by Jacobs and others, that 20 terawatt wind and 10 terawatt of solar power, 2 to 1. And let's go through the exercise for just a couple of things. Let's look at the steel requirement. We'll need 25 billion metric tons. That's 25,000 million metric tons of steel to install 20 terawatts of wind and 10 terawatts of solar. Well, I'm not going to do it all in 1 year. Let's say I'm going to ramp it up in 10 years. And then that means we need about 1,250 million metric tons per year. And after that, 2,500 million metric tons for the initial part. And then in perpetuity, we will need about 5% to be replaced each time because they have a lifetime of only about 20 years. Compare the amounts that are here that we need initially or then in perpetuity to the current steel production. So it's, and of course, we have to almost double our entire steel production. The steel industry can't be doubled in a short order. It's going to take a lot of time. And of course, that means if you're going to be producing that much steel, because we'll be requiring for cars and for trains and bridges and rails and all the other things as well. Steel is used for building, steel is used for many other things, but here we are allocating most of the steel production to making the wind turbines or solar panels, the frames for that. That's a big, big challenge, which I have not seen the proponents really address that. Another concern is the area. Let's look at the wind. Again, it's because of the energy source, the solar energy, is very dilute. You need a large area for. So we will need about 5 million square kilometers for the 20 terawatts of wind. What does 5 million square kilometer look like? It looks roughly the half of the area of the United States. But it's not just the area, it's also the locations where wind power, to be effective, you generally put them on the ridges or where the wind is persistent or kind of on a consistent way. But then removal of trees from ridges, then all other land use changes that it entails means we are encroaching habitats for wildlife and lots of other things. So the land use change effects are going to be enormous. And as we encroach with the wildlife, as we have learned recently, that's another time when when we run the risk of pandemics. We expand that. That has happened a few times. When humans encroach into the areas of where the animals were there, they were fine, but then the viruses find an opportunity for another host, and there we go. And then let's look at the battery storage. Is that at all of feasibility? Well, people always say, well, the battery prices are coming down very rapidly. Yes, they are coming down, but let's get real. We will need about 100 hours of storage at least. So for the 30 terawatt system, that translates to 3,000 terawatt hours. So you need 3,000 terawatt hours. So 4 hours of storage is just a little over 4 days. 4 days of storage is not a very large. If you have a storm system or something, but it's at least something. It's a minimal, and we're hoping that maybe other places can contribute, and we may be able to transfer the power from other areas. But you need at least this much. So let's see how much lithium is required per megawatt hour of storage. Right? You need 260 tons of lithium for every megawatt hour. Remember, a mega to a tera is a million-fold. So the amount of lithium that is needed is 980 million metric tons. Okay, well, okay, we have a number here, but how much lithium is the world producing? Well, it's only 60,000 tons a year. That's 0.06 million metric tons. That was the production in 2019. And we will require something on the order of 980 million metric tons. I'm not saying that there isn't that much lithium in the world. There probably is, but it's dilute and it's just not there. But to ramp up the production from our current of 0.06 to 980, it's not easy. And then we will be requiring not only for that, we will also require for our cars. Now, the current production of lithium is barely enough for 5 million Nissan Leaf cars. And the total global fleet is about 200 billion, global fleet of 2 billion cars. And here we are only about 5 million Nissan Leafs. It's all you can make with the current production. So it's still a very long way away. But if you had a base load nuclear power available, you wouldn't have to require storage of this kind. You could devote all the production that you are doing, go straight to electricity, go straight into power, the charging for that, instead of requiring it for backup storage and other things. It's the density of energy fuels is what's the most important really factor here. There's a cartoon from Energy Education website showing the fuel energy density in megajoules per kilogram. Sugar has got about 19 megajoules, coal has 24, fat, no, lactose, it's a little higher, it's 39. So gasoline is about 46, and uranium, well, it's about 16,000 times. Yeah, people like to people use log scales for when you have such large disparities, and then you can at least put them all on the same chart. But this guy is kind of showing a ream of paper over here. But the consequence of the very high energy density is that it has a very small environmental footprint. That means you don't have to do as much digging. You can leave the world, the earth, the area, the regions to be by themselves instead of encroaching into it to do your mining, to do your materials recovery. So that's the big advantage of uranium also. It takes up a very, very small amount of area, and you can have it not too far from the energy consuming centers, which means you will not require very long distance power transmission lines. It's also among the lowest over its life. Nuclear power has the lowest CO2 emissions per kilowatt hour. So from coal of about 900 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, nuclear is only about 12. Wind is about 14. Concentrated solar power is about 40. And your residential PV systems are about 48 grams. That's because this is our life cycle. It's not that they are producing CO2 while they're producing electricity. It's just that the system production and installation involves consumption of fossil sources and emission of carbon dioxide. So this is the life cycle emission. So I want to turn attention to a little bit for the next few minutes on some of the common objections to nuclear power that people talk about. One is, what about the waste? First of all, it's not a waste. What is the barely spent fuel is it's a resource. And the nuclear fuel, it's a little solid. These are solid pellets inside a fuel rod tube. They're not going anywhere. They're staying right there. And they are, in the normal use, only about 5%, 2 to 5% of the original energy content of the that was in the pellet, the uranium-235 pellet, has been used. It's just that by the time that much electricity has been produced from it and energy has been extracted from it, solid fuels tend to develop the other products that come in and they are staying there, and gases, and there are cracks that develop or defects that get formed in the crystal lattice, which makes controlling the flux of neutron difficult. And so things like xenon and all build up in there. They kind of get locked in the matrix, and that's why they are generally removed from the reactor and then allowed to cool first in about 20 feet of water for a while, sometimes up to 10 years or so that the real hot stuff has decayed down. And then you can move them into these concrete casks, and they are passively cooled by air draft. There's no, dry, and you can walk right up to them and you can monitor them, and you can see it's not the green goop that the Simpsons show on there. If that's not what nuclear waste looks like. And the other thing that people conflate with nuclear waste is generally based on Hanford, but that was a weapons processing plant, and those wastes are of a different kind. And this has got this is all fairly, most of your fuel value is still there. And what we are looking forward to doing is removing them to put them in these newer generation reactors, the breeder reactors, the fast breeders, or the molten salt reactors that can then consume it all the way down. You can extract a whole lot more energy. So there is plenty of fuel that is still sitting there. That it's not a waste, it's a resource.
I have a knife next to you there. It's a knife.
Luis, is there a question? Somebody was talking? No.
I think it's an incident. I muted
Okay.
Dr.
All right.
Sorry.
No problem. No problem. Let's look at another one. The safety. This is a very important point. Nuclear power is the safest technology that we have. This chart, which is from based on the papers by Markandeya and Wilkinson, and then updated by Sovokol. And I took the chart from our World in Data Energy. It shows the fatalities per terawatt hour for various sources. And for coal, there's put only about 30 or 40 here. Actually, it's much higher. 30, it's more like 160. This is actually without considering some of the pollution that comes from it. This is if the plants are operating with the modern scrubbers. So it's there, and then biomass, and this your gas, but you can see nuclear is very little, 0.07, 0.04, they're comparable over here. But actually this 0.07 includes an estimate of 4,000 fatalities from Chernobyl. They never materialized. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. If I take those out, this drops to below, much lower than, so that it'll become 0.0013. So then the question is, well, what about nuclear accidents? I mentioned Chernobyl in a second ago. So yes, let's take a second and go through those. Well, the first one major that got headlines was the 3 Mile Island in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania in '79. Well, what happened was that there was a loss of cooling, partial meltdown of the core, but the containment system held. Some radioactive gases were released. There were no casualties, no health effects from the exposure. Nobody was harmed. Nobody died. But actually, no health effects were noted also. The amount of radiation that released that people would have received would be a tenth of what normally people receive on a day, you know. What about Chernobyl 10 years later? What that happened was, in that case, there was a steam explosion. It was not a nuclear bomb that went off. It was a steam explosion because of a flawed experimental safety test. The reactor was also built in a strange way. It had no containment. It's not the way we build reactors in this, but the Russians did that. The Soviets did that, built those reactors. I would urge people to watch the 5 episodes of on HBO if you can. Chernobyl, it's a great documentary, talks about, and yes, while the documentary in the beginning kind of really shows that what a horrendous disaster it was, which it was. I don't want to minimize it, but look at what has happened over there. What really happened? What were the causes? And that the way it's been portrayed is much, much worse than the actual. So there's the fire that ensued to contact the graphite, and a lot of radioactivity was released, exposing about 600,000 people. 50 workers, the first responders really, they died from acute exposure to the radiation, and about 200 suffered radiation illness. Initially, the International Atomic Energy Agency estimated, based on what's called linear no threshold theory, means that every radiation is bad. This is what we have been fed on. And this was what was developed during the weapons, because we were looking at weapons development programs and trying to estimate. The only figures that we had were when people were really exposed to very high levels of radiation, like bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then kind of extrapolating them down to low levels that people might have. So that extrapolated, that use of that extrapolation is what gave rise to this estimate of 4,000 additional cancers over their lifetime. A subsequent report by the UN actually says that those cancers are going to be undetectable because you're realizing that the LNT, the linear no threshold, just doesn't work. And as such, in that population, this very large, the 600,000 people, 120,000 cases of cancer are going to be anticipated in the population in any case. Cancer is a fairly prevalent condition that people develop. What about Fukushima? No. First thing, well, the power shut down as planned because of the earthquake. And then, because of the loss of power, meant the cooling water could not be circulated, and the backup diesels generators got flooded because of the tsunami. And that's what led to the partial meltdown of the fuel rods. The primary containment held. None of the really radioactive materials were released. Some hydrogen explosions occurred in the secondary confinement and led to the release of some radioactive gases and some radioactivity in the area. Some tritium and some other elements were released at that point. And more than, I think the figure is closer to 200,000 people were displaced from their homes. Radiation levels in that area were, at that time, the rates initially that were detected in the neighboring areas was about 2 to 3 millisieverts per month. 2 to 3 millisieverts per month is what there's, because over there, generally it's even less than that. It's about a tenth of that. But there are many places in the world that have much higher ambient radiation. We are bathed in radiation. We are living with radiation all the time. Living on Earth gives us about 3 to 7 millisieverts in any, depending on where you are. And there are some places where it's even higher, like 20 millisieverts per month. And but people are living there. The fact remains that our bodies are really designed to repair themselves also. The linear no threshold that I mentioned earlier basically has its assumption that the body never repairs, that each damage is cumulative. So the one damage, if there is one little radiation and if later on you get another one, you just add on to that and add on to that. Whereas we know that in our bodies, cells are always turning things over. They're always, DNA repair is taking place. And so it goes on. But fear mongering is enormous. It's a big thing. The fact is that no casualties from radiation were detected, or there were none. A couple of workers suffered initially, but they were being monitored as they were going into fever. They had their dosimeters with them, and unlike in Chernobyl, there were no fatalities or no. But yes, there's a mental stress, and because of dislocation, about 1,500 people lost their lives because of the forced evacuation and other stresses. Here's a meme from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's coverage of that. So first they say, terrible accident in Fukushima, radiation spread to the surrounding communities, almost 20,000 people died from the disaster. A couple of days later, they say, we want to clarify the nearly 20,000 deaths were from the quake and tsunami, not the meltdown. But nobody remembers the second part, the correction. The first part was how they really run the stories. And there's so much fear mongering that's going on about it. Here's, as I said, living on Earth exposes us to 3 to 7 millisieverts per year of radiation. Then, a lot of it is also, some of it is the cosmic rays, others from the uranium and the thorium and other elements that are in there. You have granite counters, they're about there. There is many of the rocks in Colorado, they are radioactive. Radon seeps into the homes, and so we have a lot of natural radiation that's all the way around us. On top of that, whenever we go for dental x-rays or other CT scans and things like that, we get exposed. This is a chart produced by Dr. Wade Allison, and it's very, very instructive. He's showing what's in the red circle, it's the radiation level that is fatal to a tumor. And that radiation is like 40,000 millisieverts. If you have 40,000 millisieverts of radiation, a tumor generally dies. But radiotherapy is conducted a lot, which is at about 20,000 millisieverts per month. That's what is accepted. What he has proposed, many others, the radiologists seem to agree, is a safe threshold is about 100 millisieverts per month. Up to that, it's not harmful. If we use this as high as reasonably safe as our thing, then this green circle would be the thing which has been broadcast. I've expanded it over here. The public limit that is being enforced these days, which is driving all the policies for controlling or regulating nuclear power, is based on ALARA, which is as low as reasonably acceptable. And that dot, little black dot, I hope you can see it right in the middle of this green circle. That's the area that is 0.08 millisievert per month or 1 millisievert per year. That's what is recommended. And everyone wants to strive to that. It's ridiculous. That's what leads to those often absolutely unnecessary amount of cleanup, raises the costs like for nothing, for no benefit, no additional benefit. But what happens is, because you close down the nuclear, then where do you get the energy from? Because remember, I mentioned about China, but worldwide today, infant mortality rates are about 17,000 a day. 17,000 a day. That's comparable to what's happening with what happened with the tsunami. So imagine a tsunami hitting the world every day and selectively taking just the children under the age of 5. So then, as I was saying earlier, I want to hurry up and finish it, this part, and leaving some time for questions and answers. There are molten salt reactors, a newer generation of nuclear power plants that are inherently safe, means they're walk-away safe. There's no reason for, and we should be developing them. The molten salt reactor was actually tested, was developed in the 60s, and it ran beautifully for 4 years or so, but many times it was shut down just by, as they say, well, we're not going to worry about it, let it shut itself down, and we'll start it again Monday morning. But of course, it didn't produce enough weapons grade material, and so it lost out to the other things. And then it's just another history as to why we haven't pursued. But the molten salt reactors have improved safety. It can use the already existing resource that's in the sparingly used nuclear fuel. And then what is left at the end of that cycle is just a small amount of very radioactive, fast decaying materials, but those can be handled and stored. Since it's just a small volume, you can just dig it deep, and you have to worry only about a few hundred years. 300 years is more than enough. And they are also proliferation resistant. Okay, how about one more poll at this point? Let's see if my talking for the last 40 minutes or so has made any difference. Luis, are you going to send out the poll?
Yes. Just please kindly answer the first question. I believe we have 76, 72 to 76 disagree. 11% for somewhat agree, somewhat disagree. Only 1%, 6% indicated agreed.
Okay.
Yeah.
But most of you disagree with that statement. Good. Okay. So if I remember correctly, in the beginning to the end, there is a little shift towards higher disagreement. And that was the direction that I was hoping for. We'll take a look at that later. Let's just wrap this up. There's really an urgent task ahead of us. First of all, it's overcoming public opposition to nuclear power is a real headache. And then because of that, they're not financing nuclear power plants also. And it's absolutely important for all of us. So not just for the people in the Department of Energy or something like that, creating a public outreach and education, but each of us should make a pledge to really talk to our friends about it. And because people change their minds only when they hear from a whole variety of people, not just the scientists, not just things. Yes, Professor Hansen has been talking about it for decades. But even today, the people are not listening to him as much. We've got to stop closing functional nuclear power plants, because when we close them, what we do is we end up putting more natural gas plants or coal plants. It is not that we are substituting them with the renewables. When we put the renewables, and we also put in the natural gas. And that's what causes the problems. One way to help is the nuclear power plants is to give them the credits that are given to the renewables, and then start building these new walkaway safe nuclear power plants. Fix the electricity pricing. Currently, the way they are done, the auctions are based on the marginal cost. What's the cost of producing the next kilowatt hour? Well, that's not a good way of doing it. You really have to those kinds of auctions lead to overall systems that have very little reliability. And the world really needs reliable supply, full-time supply. And then we got to work on innovating a whole bunch of new processes to electrify the industrial processes that we have. So we have green processes for steel, cement, fuels, some green hydrogen and carbon capture and all that. And I'm going to end here. Thank you very much. By summarizing 3 bullets, the 300 pages of the book, don't waste. There's just way too much. There's too little, it's a precious thing, energy. We don't have enough, so don't waste. Be informed, read about it, and get involved, get engaged.
Are you taking any questions?
Yes. So now I am open to questions.
Well, I'd like to make a statement. I've spent my whole life professionally in nuclear power, 10 years in the naval nuclear world, and almost 30 years in commercial nuclear power. I was a manager of engineering and technology at General Electric. So I'm very familiar with the designs and the situation. And you have a very nice presentation, but frankly, I've been retired 26 years. And I can tell you for the last 35 years, I've seen nothing change. You have to deal with public opinion. You have to show people that nuclear power is essential, just like we need it essential to protect the United States. In our Navy, it has to be essential. And how you make this connection, we don't have enough time to talk now about it. I wish I did. But you've got to somehow get to the general public and influence people in Washington ultimately on doing something with our laws. And you've got to deal with the waste situation, or the resource, as you call it. Make people understand why the situation exists, and then find a way to reprocess fuel, get all the energy that's out of there and use it again so we have no waste. I've talked to myself and my customers for 25 to 30 or 40 years about this. I wish I could see a little light ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for those comments. I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, and that's my first thing is we got to have the public opinion. That has to be changed. And so, and I know if briefly, it's to do that, people have to hear these things from their pastors or from people they trust and other friends. It has to happen in a much larger way. The alarmists have had the field day up till now. And to have, just the fear mongering that has gone on about it has been just absolutely outrageous, really sickening, because when you realize how many lives have been lost because we didn't build the nuclear power plants. And then on the other side, I take some hope from, I'm seeing a little trend here that people, in Europe, for example, 6-7 countries have just applied to saying to EU to remove the restrictions on financing for nuclear power plants. That was the news that flashed this morning. I am seeing many countries develop the molten salt reactors or other breeder reactors that could, the reprocessing of fuels, you probably have worked on it yourself. It's a known technology. We have had that for a while. We just put a stop on it because we thought that this was what was going to proliferate the nuclear weapons. But that's not where the nuclear proliferation really comes. We stopped it, but it didn't really help. Other questions?
There are 2 questions in the chat box. Joe, Dr. Sebo, and Tadashi, can you ask? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask. There are 2 questions in the chat box. Or 3.
Okay, I can read the question.
Oh, okay.
So Tadashi Ogitsu asked the question, can you comment on how many years of uranium-235 based reactor could you power this planet? Somebody told me that it was about 10 years we power the entire planet. That is true. It depends on what you're counting, I didn't talk in today, but I have talked about it in my book quite a bit. The 10 years is based on what was then what's called the RAR, the assured resource, how much uranium we have. But as I told you, we are using only at most about 5% of it. So there's still 95% of the fuel that is left there that is available. So multiply that by that. Then you have, if you let the cost, the resource base depends on the cost. If I double the cost of uranium supply, or the resource base increases 10 times, okay? But the price of electricity in the nuclear thing is, the fuel cost is a minuscule part of it. Most of it is in the initial building and operation. Fuel contributes to barely a few percent of the electricity cost. So you can afford to double the cost of the fuel, but increase your supply 10 times. There are other sources of uranium also, so that is not a question at all. That has been used as a straw man, I think, kind of a argument to say, oh, we don't have enough supply of uranium. Well, if you're not using uranium correctly, and if you're pricing it things incorrectly, yes, we don't have the way that was. That's what the 10 years come from. And you can read more about it. At the blog that I mentioned earlier, my energy blog, which is CMO-Ripu, CMO-Ripu.blogspot.com. Please, that's one of my title slides also. Go there, you'll find a lot more information on it.
Sorry, my question or intention was not what is a sort of like a necessity in rather investing on the next generation versus that make use of current one.
Oh, we need to make use of the next generation ones, definitely. We need to get that.
So the timing of investment has to be something to do with how much we can hold on to with 235, right?
Well, no, they are also required 235. It's not that the other ones don't use 235. 235, and then you can also start.
How about the thorium?
Thorium is, of course, then you have got basically unlimited supply.
Yeah, yeah. So what I'm trying to understand is that where the money should go.
Yeah, the money should be going into making those thorium-based reactors at the same time, because it will be, there are building some thorium. Thorcon Corporation has announced that they'll be building one with Indonesia, the plant, which is now been approved over there. They've already gone through their first approvals with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and they have got the green light, and they got the contract for the pilot, I mean, not pilot, a demonstration and a production facility. They have a slightly different way of building nuclear reactors. They're the modular ones, where they're going to build and assemble in factory. Actually, in shipping, in shipbuilding facilities is how they do it. And then load the thing on the ship and ship sails to Indonesia. And there it is, and it's gonna, but then you can install it at the locations, and you have, because you are multiplying, you just just adding more and more units of the same type. You build many units, and then you standardize that, and then you drive the cost down by experience.
So the technology is already there. That's what
it hasn't been built. That's all. And so if we don't build it, well, China is building it, India is building it, Korea is building it. So US is just going to lose out on it, is what I see. But that's as long as somebody in the world is doing it, I'm okay.
Okay, thank you for the information.
Sure. There was a second question here. Who did you say?
Dr. Joseph Sabo. Joe, do you want to ask? I think yours is the second and followed by, and then Saj. Joe, do you, oh, sorry. Joe, please.
Correct. Thank you, Louise. Thank you for the presentation. I think that having smaller modular mass-produced reactors can be a solution to the problem. Currently, the nuclear reactors we have right now are designed and built once. And new designs are.
Yeah, it takes forever.
So why can't we focus on smaller, not 1,000 megawatt reactors, but maybe 10 megawatt reactors, and you can site 20 of them on one property?
Yep, you're absolutely right. We just haven't built any. I mean, they are building. GE talked about it, but then there's just such opposition. Nuclear Regulatory Commission did not approve one until last year. So last September was when the first time in decades that the NRC gave approval to some of these SMRs, the small modular reactors.
Thank you.
I'm expecting, so this was another, so it goes to Ed's point, so in terms of hope, these news of this kind, the fact that NRC has finally approved one and there is somebody else working on these molten salt reactors, and somebody's already got the contracts to put, and then Bill Gates's TerraPower, they are moving along also. So there are quite a few of these developments that give me a little hope.
Sergeant, you have a question?
Oh, I see over here, Joseph, your question was about mitigation of CO2, CCU. Anyone direct CO2 into reduced carbon? Yeah, oh, okay. That's a call for papers. Okay. Well, I mean, CO2 to fuel, to me, that It just places greater demand on energy production. So where's the primary energy going to come from?
The solar power splitting water and making hydrogen.
Well, but then if you're solar power, then where is the materials going to come from? As I showed you, if you want, it's not like we have that much of clean energy,
Right.
We don't have that much of spare clean energy. Let's use it.
I think Sarge have a couple questions. Sarge, do you want to ask our speaker directly?
Well, believe it or not, the energy division, we actually had the former chair of NRC and some of those people, nuclear people, at an energy symposium we ran in 2015. And I think part of the problem is that the people that do nuclear energy today, who teach physics or nuclear energy, they have no direct experience of working in a nuclear reactor. And I just was thinking about my own experience as an undergraduate that got me interested in isotopes, because we had a nuclear reactor on campus at SUNY Buffalo, and I don't know many universities today that have a nuclear reactor on campus for isotope research. So I think that's part of it, is when you say, fear mongering, or these people are, irrational. The truth of the matter is there are no real people in any neighborhood that can say, I work at a nuclear reactor and I don't have, disease, or hey, it's safe. I work there and it's safe. There's very few of us have experience with anybody who has anything to do with nuclear energy, except for what we see on television or hear about on the news. So this fear mongering, as you call it, I think is totally rational, because if I've never met anybody from a nuclear industry and I go to school and I read physics or nuclear physics, and the professors have no direct experience, then I'm going to be of the mindset that, hey, these guys have never worked in the field, and they're telling me theoretically it's safe, but I've never met somebody who has practical experience, so I don't want one in my neighborhood, right? So I think part of it is we do need the next generation of STEM people to have direct experience with nuclear fusion and isotopes and stuff like that. I mean, every big hospital, used to have one. I don't know about today. So I think that's part of it. And I think now the question is, should we really be investing in nuclear fission, or is it better to try to look at the future with fusion and Bison energy? So we think about these subatomic particles that can generate mega electron volts. Maybe start that subatomic era, which is what people are thinking right now. So I think when you talk to people in politics, the city councilors or the mayors and stuff like that, they are being advised by people that don't have experience with this area. They've been taught by professors from universities that have no experience, and they're like, well, we should be thinking about the future, not the past. Eisenhower was the one that put the nuclear policy here, and that was 1954, right? We should be thinking about 2054, and we should be thinking about fusion. We should be thinking about subatomic particles. So I think there is not a standard answer to that. So that's, I think, part of the problem is that how many on this Zoom call have worked with nuclear isotopes directly? Not many, my guess.
Can I make another point? I made a point before.
Go ahead.
I love physics. I spent my whole life on it. There are many reactors that work well, ones that are existing now, future reactors. But the problem is we have to get people to understand that we cannot win the battle against climate change without nuclear. You got to get that message, and then we'll figure out what's the best nuclear system, what's the most efficient one. But people have got to understand that we need to do it. It's a must, not a want.
Exactly. And this is
how do you do that?
the urgency with which we need to act is what gives me pause in being too excited about fusion or some of the other future reactors, because tested, proven technology, the current fission system is very, very good. It is very, very safe. let's at least focus on what we can do right now. We should also be developing the other ones on the side. The SMRs are based on on fission technology. They are not anything different, but just the design is different. So
I think you can't get hung up on those points because nuclear reactors work. There are many kinds.
there are many.
We will get more efficient.
All the nuclear fleet people, all the people who were in the Navy, so many of these ships and all, they're working fine. They're right up close proximity.
You gotta find a way to walk through people's homes and turn out the lights and say, see, you want the lights on, you've got to go nuclear.
Yeah.
It's got to be that kind of dramatic. I don't have a magic way to do this, but that is the only thing that really will work. All the discussion about experience and so forth, it's all important, but it's not the key.
No, but the problem is, if you're talking about a priest, about religion, you're going to trust a priest that prays in the temple. So if I want to know about Jewish religion, I want to ask my priest, did you pray at the temple? Right? If somebody says, well, I've never been to a temple, but I can tell you about Judaism, right? It's actually a great religion. You should practice it, but I've never been in the temple, right? Then I'm going to have my doubts, right? So when you or Rip says, yes, I've been at the temple for 50 years, then I'm going to say, yes, this person knows his business, right? But the trouble is, today's generation, who are the educators and who are the principal exponents of sustainable energy, very few of them have direct hands-on experience with isotopes, working nuclear, and the standard policy is, oh, it's safe, it's totally safe. But the people that are saying that, very few of them actually work in the industry, right? And so the public, is like, well, can we trust this person?
You're right.
You're right about that. And then that's why there are the value of groups like Mothers for Nuclear. There are two women who started this movement to save the Diablo Canyon power plant. They work over there also. They were on the radio the other day. Yes. On NPR. I was thrilled to hear somebody interview one of them on NPR, because NPR has been so anti-nuclear for such a long time. Despite I've written to them so many times with no traction, but finalists there are. What I meant to say, by they're not the only ones, but there's in today's world, people get the message from many different sources, If somebody whom they trust, they may, you don't have the experience, but if someone they trust puts a word in them, then they may say, well, it's maybe worth my examining a little bit more. That's the value. That's the value.
Do we have more questions for our speaker? We have Dr. Alan Chaffee, Dr. Yunlong Zhang, our Energy and Fuels Division officers. Alan, do you want to say a few words? Yunlong, Alan, Yunlong.
Hey, I just this is Yunlong. I just want to say thank you, Ripu, for this really amazing talk. I thoroughly enjoy your talk and also the discussions from other experts. I think this is a really wonderful talk and expose us about this greatest challenges we are facing today. Really make me think a lot. Looks like from your analysis, it's so convincing. Our answer is nuclear and other. So I keep thinking, what prevent us today from currently from building more nuclear reactors? It looks like the public conception is one of the barriers.
It's one of the biggest barriers. Yes.
Okay.
You talk nuclear, immediately you turn people off. There's so much fear mongering about it. Even today, there are so many who say, when I give talks, I often get here at conferences, people come up to me and say, no way, you can't do that. This has, they'll put up all kinds of things. It is when it blows, it goes catastrophic. Then you talk to them and say, well, what are you afraid of? How are you saying, oh, the radiation has to last for hundreds of thousands of years. Wait a minute, when things are lasting for hundreds of thousands of years, it's because they're not very radioactive. They're not decaying. That means there are not that many processes occurring. It is equivalent down to background level already. So what's the worry? I mean, there is no energy system that doesn't have, there are trade-offs throughout. And you look at it, well, if I don't do this, what am I doing? Where am I getting the energy? Or am I not getting it? If I don't get the energy, that's bad. If I get the energy from these other sources, then this is the downfall. And the renewables, it has such a nice feel to it. It's so seductive. Oh, the sun is the only nuclear reactor I need that's 93 million miles away. I don't need anything else. You know, it has an appeal, but then you realize, yes, to harvest that, how much energy or how much stuff do I need and how much space do I have to cover? And what is the total environmental footprint of that? You got to put that in perspective as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for a very inspiring talk.
Thank you.
Hello, it's Alan now. Louise, I'm sorry, I wasn't able to unmute myself, but I think I've done it now. Thank you. Yeah, also let me thank you, Ripudaman, fabulous broad talk. I actually do have a kind of question that maybe you've calculated from the financial kind of side. You talked about the materials cost, but associated with public opinion, of course, is all the risk evaluation costs and so on. Are they? I mean, they're a cost. So if you put that into the equation, I don't know how you do it, but how can you just comment on how that balances out? Because yeah, I mean, renewables sexy, like you said, yeah. But people don't see the risk and they don't ask for the risk assessments. But with nuclear, it's quite different.
Yeah, and the cost. The thing is that when they say the cost is it's negative priced electricity, when they say, well, that's because of the way we run these auctions, or sometimes when the one that is used most often is Lazard's levelized cost of electricity, life cycle over life cycle, LCOE, levelized cost of electricity. Well, it has got, even the proponents of them realize, and they talked about in the beginning, that you should not be using LCOE to compare things that are highly intermittent with those that are base load, because the cost of storage is not included. So if renewables they look cheap, it's because they have not paid the cost for what other things that are required to integrate them into the grid. And the reliability of the grid suffers when you have penetration of renewables. And at the moment, we are spending, and the worst thing that we are doing is we are shutting down good working reactors. All because the way we price it, the way we are costing it. And that's one of the big things that FERC or the Energy Department or whoever controls those things, they need to fix that. There's an excellent book that a friend of mine, Meredith Angwin, wrote recently. It's called Shorting the Grid. Recommend that if anybody is interested in really understanding the big, it's really a complicated system of regulations that the deregulation has really meant a whole huge complexity of the process, because what is, you can call yourself, I'm going to be net zero or I'm going to be this, but actually it's not that you're doing operations without producing carbon dioxide. It's because you're buying renewable energy credits. It's not that renewable energy credit produced electricity. It's just because that was an installed capacity that was turned off. Well, that produces sometimes also what's called curtailment credits. And so the way the costs have been structured right now is just, it's a job for lawyers and it's a job for accountants. It's not the job for the engineers over And we got to get rid of that. We got to straighten that out.
Ripu, does SRI have a nuclear energy program?
SRI?
SRI.
No.
Which national laboratories are still doing?
INL is still working with it. And as is the one in Oak Ridge has some, not much. Oak Ridge actually gave all of its things to China. Wonder there was a program that came in, and it's a Chinese, and they are developing. They took what they had done and said, well, we will advance it, and we will give you all the results. We'll give you, but teach us what you have done so far. Show us, and then we'll proceed from there.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Ripu. Thank you again. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Let's give our speaker a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can we call it a day today? Yeah,
Yes.
Everybody, yes, stay safe and be happy. Thank you again.
And please promise that you will talk to your friends about it.
Okay, thank you, Ripu.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for the great talk.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Louis.